The worst part wasn't that we were arguing in public. It was the moment I realized someone I deeply respected was standing just a few feet away and had heard enough to understand exactly how broken my life already was. I still remember the sound of my fiancée's voice echoing between the shelves, sharp and tired, saying my name the way people do when they've already stopped believing in you. I remember wanting the floor to open under me. And then I saw her, my CEO, watching, not judging, just seeing me. Later, as she passed by, she leaned in and whispered something so quiet, so unexpected, that my hand started shaking long after she was gone. I was 28 at the time, working in a company I had poured everything into. Long hours, missed weekends, quiet ambitions. On paper, my life looked settled. I had a job people envied and a fiancé everyone assumed I loved. But the truth was simpler and uglier. My relationship had been fading for a long time. We stayed together out of habit, shared rent, shared plans, shared silence. That afternoon in the supermarket, the silence finally broke. She was upset about something small. Groceries, money, the way I forgot things. It didn't matter. What mattered was how easily it turned into blame. I tried to keep my voice low, but hers rose. I felt exposed, reduced to a version of myself I didn't recognize. When I noticed people staring, shame burned my face. That was when I felt it, the awareness of someone else nearby. My CEO was 40, composed, confident, the kind of woman who never raised her voice because she never needed to. Seeing her there made my chest tighten. I expected disappointment, maybe pity. Instead, after a brief look, she continued shopping. I thought that was it. Outside, as I stood frozen with the cart, she walked past me. Then she stopped. Her hand brushed my arm. Light, respectful, steady. She leaned closer and said, "You don't deserve to be spoken to like that." Nothing more. No lecture. No advice. Just truth. She walked away, leaving me alone with a feeling I couldn't name. It wasn't desire. It was something warmer. Something that made me realize how long it had been since anyone had treated me with quiet kindness. I drove home in silence, knowing that whatever came next, that moment had already changed something in me. The days after that supermarket moment felt heavier than they should have. Nothing dramatic happened on the surface, yet everything underneath began to shift. My fiancée barely spoke to me unless it was to criticize something small and familiar. Her words had lost emotion, like lines repeated too many times. At night, lying next to her, I stared at the ceiling and replayed that whisper in my mind. Not because of how it sounded, but because of how it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. At work, I expected distance, professional coldness, maybe even embarrassment. But she didn't avoid me. My CEO treated me exactly the same as before, focused, sharp, demanding. Still, something subtle had changed. She noticed when I stayed late. She asked if I'd eaten. Once passing my desk, she rested her hand briefly on the back of my chair while giving instructions. It was nothing inappropriate, barely a second, but the warmth of it stayed with me all day. I told myself not to read into it. She was my boss. She was older. She lived in a different world. And yet, I found myself paying attention to the smallest details. The way her voice softened when she spoke quietly, how she listened without interrupting, how calm surrounded her even when the office was tense. She carried loneliness with elegance, the kind that doesn't ask for sympathy. At home, things worsened. My fiancé questioned where I was, who I spoke to, why I seemed distant. The truth was I didn't know how to explain a feeling I barely understood myself. There was no affair, no secret messages, just the slow realization that my heart had been asleep and someone had gently touched it awake. One evening, work ran late. A project deadline, empty floors, city lights outside the windows. She asked me to stay behind for a final review. We sat across from each other, papers between us, the silence comfortable. At some point, she sighed softly and said, "You don't look like someone who's doing fine." I didn't answer right away. When I finally did, my voice was quieter than I expected. I admitted I felt lost. She didn't pry. She didn't fix. She simply listened. When I stood to leave, she hugged me. Just once. Brief, proper, human. But in that embrace, I felt more supported than I had in years. Walking out into the night, I knew I was standing at the edge of something dangerous and beautiful. And deep down, I was afraid of how much I already didn't want to turn back. I started noticing how carefully she kept her distance after that night. Not colder, just more deliberate, as if she had stepped back to protect something fragile that had briefly surfaced between us. I tried to do the same. I buried myself in work, came home later than usual, avoided conversations that felt like traps. My fiancée sensed it. Distance has a sound, and she heard it before she saw it. Arguments at home became quieter but sharper. Less shouting, more disappointment. She accused me of being absent, of living somewhere she couldn't reach anymore. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. The truth was, my mind was elsewhere, not with another woman in a physical sense, but in a place where I felt understood, calm, and strangely safe. At the office, we were assigned to work closely for several days. Long meetings, shared documents, focused hours, side by side. There were moments when our hands brushed while reaching for the same page, moments when our eyes met and stayed just a second longer than necessary. Nothing was said. Everything was felt. That kind of tension doesn't rush. It waits. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Rain hammered against the windows. The city blurred into reflections of light and shadow. Everyone left early except us. The building felt hollow, quieter than usual. She stood by the window, arms crossed loosely, watching the rain. Without turning, she said she used to love storms, that they reminded her she didn't have to control everything. I told her I felt like I was failing at the one thing everyone expected me to have figured out: love. She turned then, not as my boss, as a woman. Her expression softened, and she reached out, touching my cheek gently, as if asking permission without words. I didn't move away. The kiss that followed wasn't rushed or hungry. It was careful, almost hesitant, like both of us were aware of the weight behind it. When it ended, we stood there breathing quietly, foreheads close, the storm still raging outside. She whispered that this didn't make things simple. I knew that. But for the first time in a long while, simple wasn't what I wanted. That night, I went home soaked from the rain, my heart louder than the thunder. My fiancée was asleep. I lay beside her, staring into the dark, understanding that the life I'd been clinging to was already ending. And the one beginning terrified me, not because it was wrong, but because it felt dangerously right. The morning everything collapsed, it didn't happen with shouting. It happened quietly, which somehow hurt more. My fiancée stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, her voice calm in a way that meant she had already made up her mind. She said she felt me slipping away long before the supermarket, long before the late nights. She asked if there was someone else. I told her the truth, carefully. There wasn't another relationship. Not yet. But there was honesty I could no longer fake. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded as if something finally made sense. The ultimatum came softly. Either I recommitted fully, wedding plans, shared future, no doubts, or we stopped pretending. I didn't answer right away. That silence was my answer. She left that afternoon, taking her coat, her anger, and a life that no longer fit me. The apartment felt empty in a way that echoed. At work, tension spread fast. Rumors have a way of growing legs in offices. A senior colleague, someone who had always watched my CEO a little too closely, started making careful comments, planting doubts. I could feel eyes on me during meetings, could sense the shift in how people whispered when she and I were in the same room. I tried to pull back, to protect her, but distance only seemed to make things worse. Then one afternoon, I was called into a meeting I didn't expect. Doors closed. Accusations wrapped in polite language. My chest tightened as I realized how easily everything could be twisted. Before I could speak, she stepped in. Calm, direct, unshakable. She shut it down without raising her voice, making it clear that personal assumptions had no place there. She defended me openly, professionally, risking her own reputation to do so. Later that evening, We stood alone in her office. The city glowed outside the windows, unaware of the storm inside me. I told her I didn't want her to fight battles because of me. She reached for my hands, holding them firmly, grounding me. She said she wasn't protecting a mistake. She was standing up for something honest. We didn't kiss that night. We just stood close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. She admitted she was afraid of judgment, afraid of wanting something she wasn't supposed to want. I told her I was terrified too, of losing stability, of disappointing people, of choosing love this late and this complicated. When I left her office, I knew there was no going back. I had chosen truth over comfort. Whatever came next would hurt someone. But for the first time, I wasn't running from that reality. I was walking toward it, steady, knowing that real love never arrives without asking something in return. The end didn't arrive with a dramatic announcement. It unfolded slowly, the way real endings usually do. A few days after my fiancée left, we met one last time to talk through what remained, logistics, apologies, quiet acknowledgments of years that had mattered even if they hadn't lasted. There was sadness, but no hatred. When she walked away for good, I felt grief and relief, both at once. I finally understood that staying would have been the real betrayal. At work, the tension eased. The rumors faded when nothing scandalous followed. The colleague who tried to undermine us lost influence the moment his intentions became obvious. People moved on. Offices always do. What didn't fade was the way she and I learned to exist together, carefully at first, then with growing ease. We didn't rush into anything. No declarations. No promises made in emotional moments. We started with walks after work, shared meals, long conversations that stretched into comfortable silences. Sometimes she would reach for my hand without looking at me, as if it felt natural before it felt allowed. The first time we kissed again, it was on a quiet street under soft city lights, unhurried and real. Not an escape, a choice. She showed me parts of her life few people saw. The quiet evenings, the vulnerability behind her confidence. I saw the weight she carried and never complained about. And she saw me not as someone unfinished or lacking, but as someone becoming. Love with her wasn't loud. It didn't demand. It rested its head on your shoulder and stayed. We learned each other's rhythms, fears, habits. There were doubts, yes. Age, judgment, the future. But none of those felt stronger than the calm we found together. One evening, months later, we stood on her balcony watching the city breathe below us. She leaned into me, and I wrapped my arms around her, realizing how natural it felt, like something that had been waiting patiently until we were honest enough to receive it. I had spent years believing love was about timing and rules. What I learned instead was this: real love arrives quietly, asks you to be brave, and stays only if you choose truth over comfort. I didn't find it when my life was perfect. I found it when it finally became real.